Namaskar, I am Biju Dharmapalan and you are watching Science Time, a show that brings you exciting developments from the world of science and technology. Let's first look at some of the exciting stories. ISRO places 36 satellites into orbit in its first commercial mission. Fungal disease spiked during the COVID pandemic and pathogens spreading due to climate crisis, says WHO. GM mustard gets regulator approval for field cultivation in India. Now let's see the news in detail. The Indian Space Research Organization successfully launched its heaviest rocket, Launch Vehicle Mark III or LVM-3 from the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota, putting in orbit 36 satellites of the UK-based OneWeb satellite communications company. The launch of the LVM-3 with its largest ever payload of 5,796 kg also marked India's entry into the global commercial launch service market. OneWeb Limited is the UK-based customer of New Space India Limited, the ISRO's commercial arm and a global communication network powered from space, enabling internet connectivity for governments and business. This is the first time this launch vehicle carried multiple satellites and launched them into low Earth orbit. This was also the first time any of the India's rockets carried a 5.8-ton payload to space, the heaviest payload for the space agency to date. The mission will make India position itself to capture a larger chunk of the commercial space sector. Now let's move to the next story. According to a newly released World Health Organization report, health-threatening fungi are spreading in geographic range due to climate change, while some fungal diseases spiked during the COVID-19 pandemic. Recently, WHO published its first ever list of fungal priority pathogens, cataloging 19 organisms that experts identified as the greatest threat to public health. The report, which involved more than 400 mycology experts and a review of more than 6,000 research papers, ranked fungal pathogens based on public health impact and risk of resistance to antifungal drugs. Of the 19 fungi included, 4 were identified as being of critical priority. These included 2 most common fungal pathogens globally, Aspergillus fumigatus and Candida albicans, as well as Cryptococcus neoformans, which is a leading cause of death in people with HIV. Aspergillus fumigatus mainly affects the lungs, while Candida albicans is the most common cause of thrush and invasive infections in vulnerable patients have high mortality rates. Infection rates of both pathogens rose in many countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. The 4th critical priority pathogen, Candida auris, grows as a yeast and was first discovered in humans in 2009. This pathogen is intrinsically resistant to most available fungal medicines and has high outbreak potential. Let's move to the next story. India's biotech regulator, the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee or GEAC, has approved genetically modified mustard for commercial cultivation. This paved the way for the country's first transgenic food crop nearly 15 years after its inventor, Professor Deepak Pendal, who worked on it in his Delhi University lab and fields near the national capital. The decision is great for the country because GM mustard would bring better yields and lower costs for farmers, said Professor Deepak Pendal, former Vice Chancellor of Delhi University and the scientist behind GM mustard, technically called Dara Mustard Hybrid 11 or DMH11. The partially state-funded project cost rupees 70 crores from lab to field trials. GEAC's approval clears the path for commercial seed production of GM mustard, and the use of the technology to produce more GM-based mustard hybrid varieties further. India imports up to 60% edible oils to meet its domestic demand. GM mustard allows for the hybridization of a plant that otherwise self-pollinates, facilitating the creation of high-output hybrids. Developed by the Center for Genetic Manipulation of Crop Plants of Delhi University and the National Dairy Development Board, and partly funded by the Department of Biotechnology, DMH11 is a testimony to homegrown scientific prowess. From this episode onwards, we are starting a new segment, Science Quest, where we will discuss some of the curious questions from the world of science. This week's question is, what is the difference between a partial and total solar eclipse? A solar eclipse happens when the moon moves between the sun and the earth, blocking the light of the sun from reaching the earth. This leads to a solar eclipse as the moon casts a shadow on the earth. There are three types of solar eclipses: total solar eclipse, partial solar eclipse, and annular solar eclipse. During a total solar eclipse, the moon covers the sun's disk entirely, whereas in partial and annular solar eclipses, the moon only blocks a part of the sun. A partial solar eclipse occurs when the sun, moon, and the earth are not exactly aligned, and the sun appears to have a dark shadow on a small part of its surface. An annular solar eclipse happens when the moon covers the sun's center, leaving the sun's visible outer edges to form a ring of fire or annulus around the moon. For the first time in over a decade, a partial solar eclipse was observed in several parts of India on October 25th. For Indians, the next time a major solar eclipse will be visible is an annular eclipse on May 2031. With this, we come to the end of this edition of Science Time. Keep sending your feedback and suggestions through email. Our email ID is indiascience@vigyanprasad.gov.in. We will be back with more exciting stories from the world of science next week. Stay tuned to India Science.